All right, so the topic for today is going to be on healthy touching, and while it looks like it's a very short topic, it's only short when you exclude all spiritual topics and all of that out of that. Just keep it outside of that. Now there's definitely a side for emotional and physical and sexual and all that. There's definitely parts there that correlate with it, but honestly, that boils down to reading other people, controlling yourself so you don't cross any boundaries. It boils down to like um, being aware of being able to be aware of others, understanding yourself, understanding limits, not crossing any boundaries. It boils down to that sort of thing. It also touches upon infants with like if you're adults versus infants and how like what exactly does healthy touching look like. Um, for infants, it's actually a requirement. They need it. They need the love. They need the support. There is they cannot grow. They cannot function without love, which is tied to touching. I don't have any kids, so I can't exactly visualize that. I can't really talk about that. That's not something that I can really go too far into. I just know and I've heard of stories of babies dying just because they were starved for affection and for being held. And frankly, if people, infants, can die from not being held, from being touched, then this is something that should be talked about or at least mentioned. And honestly, I haven't really heard anything else about this. But this is important because last year, a lot of relationships suffered and ended up breaking apart, breaking down because COVID hit, and a lot of people were forced to confront a lot of issues and a lot of problems that they were not forced to deal with before. There's a lot of unhealthy habits being broken too, which is a good point to make. But even still, it raised up to the point where, because social connections are so incredibly important, and yet it's not something. Again, this is not something that's ever talked about. So it took me a while to see and understand why some of the problems were happening, and it hit me until there was a personal problem that came up, and I realized why this was so incredibly important. It's because people need to be around others. They need the connections. They need the actual closeness of other people. That's not really the same thing as healthy touching, though, per se. But it does kind of fall into the same category, so to speak, because touching means you're around other people. You're within arm's length. So as far as adults go, there's definitely boundaries, restrictions, an understanding of what's socially appropriate and what's not. With babies, it's more like it's a requirement. This is what they need in order to live and survive, and eventually they grow and learn, hopefully, the proper way. And as far as like foundations and how to like the do's and do nots, up until they can start making their own rules and understanding and basically above and beyond what the parents should be able to teach them. That's the physical side. The whole sexual side, honestly, I'm not even gonna touch. It's just basically boiled down to consent between you and your partner or spouse, and honestly, it's maintaining communication, the relationship, and such like that. There's really nothing more there too deep other than growing the relationship. So no need to actually go down that road per se. But I will say this: um, misasso- mis misattaching to other people through emotional connections can happen through touching, where uh, I want to use porn as an example here, where people associate like love and care with the videos through touching themselves. So I would have to say that there is definitely an emotional point there to be made. I'm not going to go down that. I just will point it out and say that you know improper emotional connections can lead to improper touching, unhealthy touching too. You know, the spiritual side now. I will say I will start off with a very interesting story in Isaiah where I believe there was an angel who visited him. God sent an angel to go visit him, and in order to purify him because he was choking and couldn't breathe. This was found around in Isaiah 6, by the way. He couldn't breathe, so or he couldn't talk. It's one of those two. So an angel touched a coal to his lips to purify him. I hesitate to call that healthy touching, but I will say this. When it comes down to Christianity, God, and angels, like righteousness and being without blame, being pure and holy, I'm pretty sure that would fall under the category of healthy because it's right. I mean, if you're not touching something the right way, you're touching something the wrong way. And generally speaking, anything that is wrong is probably unhealthy. It's a very far stretch when you're going from something that is natural and healthy to something that is supernatural and something spiritual. Like there is a step, but it's a very large step. But it's a very interesting story to point out there. Numbers 9 through 7. This is a different type here about contamination here, because unhealthy touching can lead to contamination. Specifically with picking up germs, viruses, anything else that the other person had. So that's a physical aspect right there. 2 Corinthians 6:12. You are limited in your own affection, which means since we have physical bodies here, our touching is going to be very limited to what is physical, so to speak. If you have some sort of counseling, therapy, there's some sort of therapy that I went through years ago that does apply to this. It's like holding therapy or whatever. It's basically helping others to emotionally attach properly through emotion, through I can't remember, but anyway, you are limited in your own affection. 2 Corinthians 6:12. We're limited because we're in physical bodies right now, according to what the Bible is teaching here. There's a lot more, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot that we aren't going to understand about this. And I would have to say that the laying of hands by the apostles onto the people and healing them is also something to note, where healing directly occurred through physical contact. Now, in the case of Jesus and the woman who was bleeding for like 6 years, that was physical contact, but there's clothes in between. So, healing power going out from Jesus, and that is something that he noticed. So, that is still a form of touching that is worth mentioning. Now, on the flip side, Korah's followers, when they offered strange incense, they were struck down dead. But there was idol worshipping there, where they were touching and worshipping the wrong objects, where God immediately struck them down and killed them within the temple that they were at, the makeshift one, because this was before this is while before the Israelites entered the Promised Land, when Moses and his brother Aaron and Miriam were there. This was before they moved into the Promised Land to claim the land for their own. So Korah's followers got immediately destroyed because of improper touching there. Now, let's see. Numbers 19:22. You become unclean by touching what is unclean. There was a lot of rules and regulations talking about like being clean, keeping yourself clean, and purity when it comes down to like emissions, which there's quite a few verses, and I want to say like 2 or 3 chapters talking about that alone, for women and men. But I think more for women just because of childbirthing. And it also touches upon sexual relations too, improper sexual relations. Colossians 2:21 talks about, basically it boils down to don't touch. You could probably translate that to if it's not yours, don't touch it. Types of touching: handshakes, hugs, greetings, farewells. That's what the physical limitation is right there. It's not. It's very cut and dry when you go down to just keeping it physical here, but the impacts and ramifications when you go above and beyond that, honestly, it's there's a lot more there. Hopefully, this short video, was very helpful here, and I'll do some more of these videos later on. Thank you for listening.